Chapter 16. An Exciting Search. Pete and his father wondered if a piece of floating wood had bumped into the side of the cruiser as they beamed their flashlights over the side of the Sweetie Pie. "See anything, Dad?" his son asked. "No. Do you?" "No. Maybe it was a sharp log." "You don't suppose someone in a boat—" The words were hardly out of Mr. Hollister's mouth when they heard the soft dipping of oars. Both turned their lights in the direction of the sound. They could see nothing, and in a moment everything was quiet. "Dad, someone was prowling around our boat," Pete exclaimed. "I'm afraid so, and he evidently didn't want to be seen." "But why?" "Maybe he thought no one would be on board in such a bad storm," his father replied. "That would make it a good chance to break into the cabin and steal some of the equipment." "It's a lucky thing we were here and heard him," Pete said. Mr. Hollister decided to stay up the rest of the night and watch. He told his son to return to bed. There was bright sunlight when Pete awakened again. As he got up, Ricky awoke. The boys dressed and hurried to the deck. Their father was glad to see them and said he would go now and get some sleep. Nothing had happened while he was on watch, but in the distance through the woods he'd seen a flickering light. "I bet someone's camping there," said Ricky. "Or it could have been a cabin, maybe Old Moe's," Pete suggested excitedly. "May we go look, Dad?" "All right, but be careful." At this moment, Mrs. Hollister appeared. She said any search must come after breakfast, so the children helped her prepare it. In their eagerness to be off, they started to eat very fast, and she had to warn them to slow down. When the 4 older children were ready to leave, Ricky stepped onto the split tree trunk alongside the boat. "Yikes!" he exclaimed. "This makes a swell bridge right to shore. Come on, kids." Balancing like a tightrope walker, Ricky crossed the trunk. Pete and the 2 girls followed. Once Ricky teetered and nearly fell into the river, but he recovered his balance just in time. "Crickets!" he exclaimed, reaching the shore. "This sure is fun." Suddenly he let out a whoop. "See all the fish!" "Where?" He pointed down into the river. "Right there. They're in a wire pin." The other children scrambled along the tree trunk to where Ricky was standing. Below them, in a wire crib, was a sight they had never seen before. Hundreds of clownfish were swimming about. They were of all sizes, from 6 inches long to 25 inches. "They're giants," Holly remarked. "The fish aren't tagged," said Pete, "but do you suppose they belong to Old Moe?" "Oh, I hope so," Pam replied. "If we find him, we'll get the reward offered by Mr. Fender." Meanwhile, Ricky had picked a leaf off one of the branches and thrown it into the crib. The fish evidently thought it was food and wiggled up to nibble it. "Say," Ricky exclaimed, "all we have to do is net one of these for our tank at the trading post." Holly stared at the fish, fascinated. They swirled about so fast that she said they made her dizzy. "If you fell in there with those hungry fish," Pete said with a chuckle, "they sure would pull your pigtails." Pam and Ricky laughed, but not Holly. She suddenly had leaned too far forward and now was trying desperately to keep from falling into the fish pen. Splash! The fish scurried in every direction as Holly went under. Pete bent down and helped her climb back. "Ugh," she said, spluttering. "That water tastes awful." "You mean you don't like raw fish?" Pete grinned. Holly made a face at her brother, then asked them all to wait for her while she went to change her clothes. "Okay, we'll walk slow," Pam promised. Her sister hurried back, and the others jumped to the embankment. The trees and bushes were so thick it was hard to see far ahead. But there were 2 very narrow trails. One led along the shore, the other directly among the trees. As the children waited for Holly, Pete heard a rustling sound. Turning, he could just barely make out a figure some distance up the shore trail. The next second, it disappeared completely. "I'm going after him," Pete cried out. "Come on, Ricky. Pam, you wait for Holly." As the boys ran, Ricky said, "I wonder if we can catch him. If he's old Mo, maybe he can't run fast." Running was not easy, because the path was covered in wet, slippery leaves. Once Ricky skidded and fell flat. Pete waited for him to get up, and the younger boy said dolefully, "Now that man's far ahead of us." "Perhaps we can pick up his footprints," Pete suggested hopefully. "There's a muddy place up ahead." When they reached it, Pete whistled in surprise. He pointed out footprints in the mud. Several sets had been made by the same man, but one of the prints was from a boy's moccasins. "Oh boy!" Ricky exclaimed. "Bobby wore moccasins at our house. This is a real detective's clue." Then he looked off into the wood and shouted, "Bobby! Bobby, where are you?" The only answer was a faint echo of his own voice. The boys started to follow the footprints. To their amazement, those of the boy suddenly ended. "Maybe he climbed a tree," Ricky suggested, looking up. They saw no one hidden among the branches, however. After a moment, Pete said, "I know what. The man must have carried the boy." Eagerly, the Hollister brothers followed the man's footprints. Presently, the path turned into the woods and became so overgrown with moss and grass that Pete decided they must have taken a wrong turn. The footprints were gone. "What'll we do?" Ricky asked his brother. "I guess we'll have to go back," Pete decided, and started for the boat. Meanwhile, Holly had changed her clothes and now waited with Pam for the boys to return. "I wonder if they found that man," Pam said, explaining about the person on the shore trail. If he was old Mo, where do you suppose this other trail goes?" Holly asked. "To old Mo's cabin, maybe?" "Let's walk along a little way and try to find out," Pam said impatiently. They started off, but found the trail full of sharp stones, which made them turn their ankles and hurt their feet. They kept their eyes down to avoid the stones. For this reason, they did not notice someone watching them from up ahead. As Pam looked up suddenly, she gave a little scream. Beside the path and peering at the girls from between two bushes stood a strange old man. He had white hair and a long flowing beard, deep-set dark eyes, and a thin nose. The old man was shabbily dressed. In his right hand he held a crooked cane. He lifted it menacingly toward the children, who stopped short and stared at him. "Hello," Holly ventured timidly, gulping with surprise. The old man said nothing, merely glaring at the Hollisters. You wouldn't hurt us, would you?" Holly continued bravely. The old man took a step forward, the cane still held over his head. "Come on," Pam whispered to her sister. "We'd better go back." Suddenly the stranger's eyes flashed. Go away! Go away!" he shouted. "You have no business here."